Well, it's a fascinating topic. I mean, anything to do with films and entertainment and the arts, because I think these stories are not told often enough. And we're really thrilled to have today people who are very much right now on the intersection of this. Mallika Sarabhai, brilliant dance at the opening thing, merged science and art, and we're just so thrilled to have her here today. And of course, Mallika's father, one of the heroes of Rocket Boys. We have the producer, Siddharth Roy Kapur, and Rocket Boys, of course, really revolutionized the way people watch stories about science in India. And I'm sure there are many here who watched it, who probably binged it. And we're really fortunate to have these two representatives of the arts world today here with us here at this session.
Hello everyone. Thank you for being here. Like I said jokingly behind the scenes, I'm bringing the science in this conversation, and we have Bollywood right here. So I think it'll be a fun conversation. Alright, no problem. We'll call it then the entertainment industry. Alright. Okay, I think Indian science has many stories to be told, and they are tools for nation building. They are very inspiring, and they can also showcase national achievements. So if we start talking a little bit about Rocket Boys, maybe we could start. It's how did this come about? I mean, how did you decide to make a story about 2 or maybe 3 major characters? And
I think Siddharth should answer that because that's where it started.
Thanks, Mallika. A young writer called Abhay Korane came to us one day with an idea saying that, did you know that the father of India's nuclear program and the father of India's space program were not just these icons that we read about in school and had knowledge of and, had theoretical knowledge about what they did, but that they had a very close relationship, and then that their lives were intertwined in so many ways, personally as well as professionally. And I have to admit, sorrily, none of us in that room really knew that. And then when we got into that a little bit more and we read the personal lives and the professional lives of Dr. Baba and Dr. Sarabhai, what we realized was that they were so closely intertwined that it made for fascinating drama. I mean, in addition to the fact that you would always want to entertain people, you also want to illuminate in some way. And this was one story which gave us the ability to be able to tell such a multi-layered narrative which was dramatically compelling, but also gave you a sense of the founding fathers of our country and what these institution builders really did and how their lives came about and the sort of context in which they lived and worked and grew older. So when we approached Dr. Sarabhai and asked her, whether this is a story that she would like us to tell, she and the whole family were so gracious enough to tell us that they would like us to tell it, number one, and number two, they gave us a creative license to dramatize it in a way that makes it entertaining and makes it compelling. Because the idea was not to make a documentary, the idea was to make a living, breathing, sort of monument to these men, which told the story of them, warts and all. We wanted them to be human beings because we often deify our heroes, but it's important to show them for all that they were. And we're so glad that the family gave us the permission to do that and was actively involved in the process as well.
Yes.
So that's where it started.
Yes, Mallika, were there doubts initially? Because it is personal as well. We're talking about your parents, we're watching it, and much of it is dramatized and fictionalized. Was there any reservation initially, or was it just go for it?
I have lived my life by the credo that it's only by transparency and showing vulnerability that truth can be recognized. And Papa and Mommy were extraordinary people. But that didn't mean they were not conflicted in one way or the other. And for me, at a time when OTT and Bollywood are primarily making icons out of chores and luteras and murderers and corrupt politicians, it was very important that 2 people who gave their lives for this nation, 2 people whose fruits we still eat every single day, that their stories got told. I have to say that I have been one way or the other involved with both Bollywood and television for most of my adult life. And to have all of them, 8 of them came, and to have, I mean, everything that they made into the script, well, most of it was in the public domain. They could have easily not come to us. But the fact that they graciously came to us, and that I was involved in the script for the better part of 2 years, and that every single comment that I made, every single change that I made, was respectfully listened to, and they tried to put it in. And I come from a world of performance. So I know the necessity of dramatizing, I know the necessity. I understand that unless you keep bums on the seats, you've lost your battle. So I mean, even for my performances, when, I don't know how many of you saw what we did night before last, it was a history of science, but it was fun. And I remember when we first did it, President Kalam wanted it to go to every single school, saying that, you know, so many more children would take science and mathematics if they saw this. For me, this was an opportunity to do that, to actually show that there can be good people, who are fun people, who are conflicted people, who are genuinely committed to building this nation into a great nation and not jingoism. And that is why the family backed them all the time.
Absolutely, that must have been wonderful for you. Now, Siddharth, your list of films have been some of the biggest hits, the best known films through the years. And it is a business, you're not doing this for the charity work or anything like that. Where did you feel that this story of 2 nuclear physicists would be able to be marketable, would be able to find that audience? Was there a moment of doubt, or were you sure?
I mean, not to sound like I know all the answers, but this one, I have to say, this particular project, from the time that it was pitched to us, I just had this inherent belief that it would work. Because it just felt so dramatically compelling, and it almost felt like, how has this story not been told so far? It was like, it was sort of reflective of how much in a bubble we all exist, right? Where we create heroes like, you know, like Dr. Sarabhai was just saying, we create heroes out of various kinds of people. Some deserve to be heroes and some don't. But these are two obvious nation builders, but they also had such dramatic lives, and they had such an interesting chemistry between them, which we believe would have existed. We've obviously dramatized it, we've obviously shown them to be, you know, a certain type of character, but generally the sense of the human being is what we wanted to be able to arrive at, which I think we did. But this is one project where I think we sort of believed it from the start.
You felt it.
Yes, and I have to say that, you know, Abhay Pannu, the director, really jumped into it in a way where he immersed himself in the history, in the minutiae of every little detail that he could come across. And those are the details that make things interesting. Those little things, one little habit of maybe a character, one trait, one little incident, and he was really able to tell the story so dramatically and so with so much humor that you know, from the time we read the script, we knew that this was likely to work. I also want to give a lot of credit to Sony Live, because you know, you might have whatever ideas you have and you go and pitch them around the place, but it's important for a platform to actually give you the ability to tell that story, and they really backed us all the way. They actually greenlit 2 seasons at one go, which doesn't happen at all. I mean, this is one of those rare instances where we wrote out 16 episodes right at the start. A lot of platforms want you to finish one season, see what the reaction is, and then greenlight the next one. But they decided, let's go all in and let's greenlight the whole thing at one go.
So all you fans have another 8 episodes to look forward to.
We're looking forward to that. Mallika, Rocket Boy sort of did talk about 2, maybe 3 scientists, and they did show it as a team. And so did Mission Mangal to a large extent. There was a team involved. This is something that maybe caused some dissonance in the scientific community, that when you want to portray in public imagination scientists, there's a tendency to want to have a narrative, a very classical rags to riches story, you know, initially it was tough and then we made it. But actually science is not a one-person show, it's a team. So where do you balance that, wanting to have one face for a story versus actually showing science as a team effort?
I personally think that was one of the great differences between Papa and Homi. That Homi was very much I will do it person, and Papa was always we shall do it. And Homi's was a vertical kind of organizational structure, and papas were always horizontal. And I think that manifests itself in the series as well. I think narratives can't be all rags to riches. We need to show that riches can also turn into very, very fertile ground, not for personal wealth building, but that people coming from very privileged families can not only have a worldview that wants the last person to be empowered, but perhaps as an inspiration for more people from privileged families to work towards the common good.
Stay back in India and work in India for India. So Siddharth, does it affect the commercial appeal of a production? The one person versus a team. Is this something you take into account when you're building the story?
You know, audiences want to watch heroes. It's important for them to be able to see someone that they can aspire to be. And in this case, a lot of the conflict between the two characters was this difference in their personalities, which I thought we tried to bring out. Which is that, you know, Homi, I'll stop saying Dr. Baba and Dr. Sarabhai, I'll say Homi and Vikram now. Homi does come across as someone who's individualistic, is driven by his mad passion to do something, and it's my way or the highway, I will get it done. And that's one way of doing things, and it can be a very effective way of doing things. Whereas Vikram's was much more collaborative, and he wanted to take everyone along. It was also a conflict between the ends to which they wanted to harness what they were doing in science, which I think was a key conflict between the two men, which we've tried to highlight as well. Now, those can be very compelling dramatically. Those sort of conflicts in friendships. They can have deep friendships, but have these very clear ideals that are very, very, you know, different from each other. And though they were both born into wealth, it's really the use of that wealth and the use of that privilege that they were able to harness into something that builds a nation, which honestly we don't see that much of, and which I think took people a lot by surprise. That these two very wealthy gentlemen could go into science and then go into nation building after that, and create institutions that we're still reaping the benefits of today.
I'd like to add to that. I think what I find compelling in the fact that the script brought this out is, you know, we live in a country where you're either with me or you're my enemy. There is no place for debate, there is no place for dissension, there is no place for questioning, or you go to jail. And there's no two ways about it. And here were two people who were very dear friends. Bobby was a very dear friend of Amma's as well, who could disagree and not take animos positions. You know, they might disagree vehemently, but they were still great friends. There was never any disrespect or suspiciousness that the other was selling out. And I think that kind of nuanced relationship between two people who are leaders, between two people who are friends, between two people who look at life differently, but whose goal is the same, I think that is very important to emphasize today.
That's hugely important. Like you said, it's a with us or against us environment right now. And like you did bring out the conflict immediately, as the opening scene is really like, why are we looking at atomic energy? Why are we looking at this? And that's fantastic. It's a very human point, that how you can agree to disagree and still remain friends. Now, we've talked about the dramatization of the science, but the science itself. Did you have to learn, did your production team, your director, did you have to learn about the science that went into it? Or did you have consultants, as we were discussing earlier, do you have consultants to help you with this?
So we did have consultants. We definitely had consultants on board who were helping Abhay write and then actually execute on what he was writing. It was very important for us to get the science as right as we could, while at the same time being dramatic about the way that we were telling it. And I think you'll see that there are sequences that are, I mean, that have never been shown before here or I think in the West, where the first scene where Homi comes into that classroom and actually has a 5-minute sequence on the gamma radiation and, you know, all that. I mean, that was literally a whole science lecture being done by a character, which also showed his flamboyance and showed the way, I mean, sort of introduced you to the character. So we didn't shy away from that. What we shied away from probably was getting too technical. But we tried to make it interesting in and driven by either conflict or driven by something interesting that was happening in the course of you giving out the science. But these were two people who would obviously be talking to each other and their teams in scientific terms, and we didn't want to shy away from that.
So the liberties were taken only with the peripheral, the other drama.
With the way it was set up.
I think one of the comments that came from scientists the most is, how could Homi jump into the water tank? You know, this is not a science lesson. Like my performance day before yesterday, it is to get you interested in science. This is not teaching you science. No number of lectures, no number of documentaries has been able to get the larger public interested in science. This has managed to do it. The number of hits that Google has had on Papa and Homi, the number of hits on science has been just phenomenal, and that's what this is about. This is to draw more people into finding out this is not a lesson in science.
True, that's very true, and I think we all scientists in India bask in that resurgent public imagination. But I would say one thing that comes across in our inner circles is moving beyond Rocket Boys. We'll come back to it at the end. But even if it's not a biopic, if there's a side character who's a scientist, how realistic and how relevant is the representation? We've come a long way from, pulse dekh ke bolna aap daddy banne wale ho, or, connecting blood pumps from mother to son to son to son, which was Bollywood.
That wasn't realistic? Oh, damn.
I don't think that's how it's done. Last I checked, not. But we have a mission to be realistic also, because it's publicly funded science, and we don't want the public to go away with thinking Indian scientists are now diagnosing pregnancy with pulse. So when it's a side character, do you really...
Or starting plastic surgery with Parvati and Ganesha?
That too. All right.
You can't keep it up.
I know. So getting back to my question, which was, when it's not a biopic, when you're not so invested in a few characters, do you really do the research?
You do, because you're going to be judged by the entirety of your show. It's going to be irrelevant which character spouts what dialogue. If it's not your lead saying it, and if it's a side character, then having a different standard for the scientific sort of accuracy for that is not feasible, because finally it's up there on screen to be seen. So I'm sure we've got a lot of things wrong. I'm not going to sit here and say that we've gotten everything right. We had consultants on. Sometimes there are disagreements between consultants who are equally sort of credentialed as well, and then you've got to just base it on your own creative expression and say, okay, I'm going to go with this because it's more dramatic. So we've tried to be as true as possible, but if we've got things wrong, we apologize. We hope to set them right in the second season.
It wasn't in that context. It's like a Munna Bhai was meant to be humorous, and so whatever, they diagnosed lymphosarcoma of the intestine by looking at an X-ray of the skull. Which was fine, it was meant for humor, right? It's a comedy show. But when it's not meant for humor, we also need to get it right. So we'll come around.
Or at least 90% right.
Yes. I mean, we scientists in the
Don't
audience.
take a foot X-ray when you have a heart attack.
Not really about a heart attack,
But I guess it's there in many fields as well. Like when I watch films on journalism, and you see the reporter being allowed to focus on one story alone for months together, it's like, that's not happened.
When you see scientists show up in perfectly coiffured look and chiffon saris, no, that's not how we are. Yeah.
Like you touched upon it about how we have different fields. Like we have science, we have the arts, and C.P. Snow also spoke about that in his famous True Culture lecture. And Rocket Boys is like on the intersection of this, in the sense you're trying to make science appealing and popular. It's just a personal question for you. You are the child or product of arts and science. Was it ever a difficult choice for you, or was it always dance?
Oh no, the only thing I knew as I was growing up was that I didn't want to dance.
Didn't want to dance?
Didn't want to dance.
Wow.
I wanted to be a macrobiologist, I wanted to be all manner of things. But I saw the extremely hard work that Amma put in. And I thought, ye humse nahi hoga. She would have 105 temperature, there would be doctors in the wings giving her injections before she went on stage.
Show must go on.
I remember her having a septic foot and the doctor actually cutting it through the performance to get the pus out and bandaging it. I said, this is not for me. I just can't. I love being on stage, but this is not for me. Which is why I went into films at the age of 15. My first film was at 15. I think this is easy. So, not knowing the other side of Bollywood, but that's a different question. So the only reason, I took physics and maths in SSC and loved chemistry and wanted to do chemistry and math. But in those days, you had to cut a frog in your first year. And that is something that I could not stomach. So I didn't go into the science for that sole reason that I did not want to cut anything, let alone a frog. And it was not till much later, after I finished my IIM, MBA, after I finished my PhD, that going through a very severe personal depression and not knowing where I was at, Papa had just died, waking up one morning saying all I want to do is dance. And it was late in that sense. I had always studied, but I was 22, and for Amma it was like a second innings. Because with the loss of my father, it was as though her partner left. And she didn't want to dance anymore. She didn't see the point. But when I came back, her second innings really started, and for the next 25 years, we were dancing together, creating together, and all of that. And it was the same with my children. My son at the age of 5 told me, I want to dance. And my daughter was as reluctant as I was, saying it's too much hard work. So it sort of repeated itself.
Oh, that's wonderful. There's a whole story there.
There it is. Rocket Boy is 3, 4, and 5.
That's we got
When the Rocket Girls surface.
Thanks for the insider information. Alright, so okay. We have made biopics in Bollywood about doctors, scientists, but they've often been people who are no longer with us. What do you think, Siddharth, about making biopics of people who are living? So sort of contemporary role models. That's another thing that we feel in science in India we need. We need to sort of also give people real living people to identify with, and not just black and white, grainy photos. They may have been landmark contributions. What do you think about making stories about people who are actually amongst us right now?
I'm all for that. And when when we made Dangal, it was a young girl from our creative team who came and told us about this article she read about these 2 female wrestlers, and we said go forward and research it and go and meet the family. And she said, you know what, she went and met them and she said, it's about them, but it's also about their relationship with their father, and how we can tell a great tale of patriarchy and a great story about a man thinking he could only live out his unfinished dreams through his sons, and then realizing that he could do that through his daughters as well. And that's how we made Dangal. So I think it's really important to tell stories of people who can inspire, as long as there's enough dramatic value in it, which there always is. I mean, you're always going to find conflict where there are people. So if you're able to find these untold stories and tell them, then it led to a massive growth in the number of female wrestlers. Yeah, there was a huge participation after Dangal.
I think that is the power of the arts, and I use the arts as a very broad term. In 2005 and 6, when my children were growing up, their friends used to come, and the friends were mostly sort of children of other educated career people. And I realized that they had absolutely no understanding of the reality of India. They really thought that the greatest question in life was whether to choose Adidas or Nike. And that with 1947, all our issues had disappeared. At that time, I was working very closely with Harsh Bandar, who as an IAS officer had resigned after the 2002 genocide. And he had just written a book called Unheard Voices. And it was about 20 people that he met in his 20 years as an IAS officer, who, being from the most marginalized groups, had actually fought, not for themselves, but for the entire group. So there was a victim of the Nalli tragedies where so many thousands of Muslims were killed. There was a street child who then led to a movement where street children were given training as electricians and plumbers, and he himself had started it. So there were these extremely moving stories, and they were all alive. So I created a performance piece called Ansuni and took it pro bono to 120 elite schools and colleges to start a discussion And there would be people, there was a manual scavenger, a woman called Narayani Amma, who later represented manual scavenging at the United Nations. And I would have audiences weeping, saying, this can't be India just now. And I used to bring in each city one of the characters on stage to actually interact with people. And it had a huge impact, and then we had a volunteer movement, and we got 7,000 volunteers to work for the weaker section. And I said, you don't have to go around, gentrifying. Have you spoken to the woman who comes to clean in your house? Does she have children? Can you teach them maths and science? Can you teach them English? Can you talk to the gardeners? Do you have their names? Can you ask them what they need? Can you give them a sense of dignity? Can you teach them about hygiene? And it was an incredible movement that lasted for 5 years, and there are still 30 schools in India which run parallel schools of the same nature for the underprivileged. So I think that whether it's movies, of course, has a much greater reach, but that is the power of the arts, and we must understand that the more conscientious the makers and the creators are, the greater we will see change.
So my question is, art has a power to inspire, which it can reach to any person without any boundaries. But science is not like that. You need certain amount of knowledge to able to understand science. So bringing these two can create phenomenal changes for human civilization. So what role is art industry trying to play? And of course, it's not easy. It's very difficult to bridge the knowledge gap. So how do you think, in future, maybe movies like Tenet or something like this, they inspire a lot of people to take up science. So how do you think art industry is gonna adapt towards this kind of stories?
I think it's really important to pick the sensibility and the tone that you're going with when you're picking a certain subject. Like even in Dangal, for example, we had music, but it was in the background, right? But we didn't shy away from having a great soundtrack because that was very important. I think we as Indians, we celebrate music, we enjoy it, we associate it with our cinema. And what tends to happen is when a film does not have great music, whether those be lip sync songs or in the background, it tends not to do that well commercially because I think music is just a big part of our culture. So even if we're doing a film on science, I think it's very important to have a soundtrack that's superb.
But I think she didn't mean the soundtrack. I think she meant Homi not going into a pop number. Why?
Why not? What the heck?
Papa had the convenience of being married to a dancer, so we could actually present the dancing without any lack of integrity.
Yeah.
Okay, so we shift gears a little bit. So we broaden it out a little bit. Of course, I'm being my own devil's advocate here, right? I'm a huge advocate for science in India. Some might not like to call it Indian science. Whatever. But when the United States makes scientific movies, it's interstellar, gravity. There is some element of American nationalism, but it doesn't come so much to the front. And I'm being my own devil's advocate here. I love feel-good movies about India. I love movies that make us want to go to work next day saying that we are building India. Many of us have returned to India from positions outside the country. So can we move towards science in India being part of a global pursuit of science? Does the Indian nationalism sentiment have to come forth so strongly? Again, to sell as part of the story, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think in this case it was Indian nationalism. It was that time. But I think if there was a film being made on a scientist today, I think it should have the science at the fore, as science is a part of the global scientific community. But in this particular case, it was
At that time, it's not nationalistic then when would it be?
And I beg to differ about the Hollywood part of it. I think because it's become a bit of a blind spot for us because that's what we've grown up watching. But when something like Armageddon happened, the aliens only came to the US and the president spoke directly to them as the leader of the free world.
The only place
So,
to go
but we lapped it up because, just sort of Americana is just so all-pervasive that it just infuses us, and we were quite happy to have him represent us.
Right, I thought of America saving the world doesn't make us better naive, right? Yeah. Or Americans saying that America is saving the world.
And I think that Close Encounters of the Third Kind aliens did touch India.
Yes, that's right.
They did, yes. No, and I just wanted to add there, when I was young and foolish, I used to think, what's all this song and dance in Hindi films? I mean, it's more Indian films, not necessary. Now I'm older and wiser, and I love it. I love it. I mean, like you said, it gives that energy. It gives that energy in a film. It really. It should not be arts or science. I think all of us are entitled to enjoy the full range of human experience in our lives on Earth, and I think it was just wonderful. Thank you for what you're doing to bring it forward. And
Thank you.